notes now and then, so please bear with me. So I'm the coordinator of this faculty-driven series of presentations on race, racism, and anti-racism. Welcome to today's event, which is Dr. Nikki Jackson's Q&A with Mr. Roosevelt Glenn, and our host is Dr. Karen Bishop Morris. I'd actually like to start with a dedication of this series. So Dr. Morris is going to share screen with a special image that we have for the purpose of this dedication. And I'll wait till she does that. So, actually, let me start talking to save time, and Dr. Bishop Morris will be showing that image. So here's the dedication. In 2020 alone, police have shot and killed over 500 people, of whom more than 20% were Black youth. Although most of their names are not widely known, we do know George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Sean Reed. We dedicate this Zoom-based virtual series of lecture discussions titled Race, Racism, Anti-Racism to their memory and in protest of their killings by police. We dedicate today's event especially to Mr. Glenn's mother, sister, his partner Laureen, and their daughter. They have all shared his ordeal. And so this is our dedication, and it comes from really from the depth of our hearts. So let me now speak a little bit about the introduction and purpose of this series. Since the brutal killing of George Floyd, millions of Americans and people in other countries have been shocked and outraged. Hundreds of protests have been held, perhaps the largest demonstrations against racism since the civil rights movement of the 1960s. The purpose of this Zoom-based series, featuring monthly presentations by scholars, journalists, and civic representatives, addressing multiple aspects of racism and anti-racism, is to sympathize with the times and current protests against racism, to provide extracurricular education on race, racism, and anti-racism, and to focus on Western racism, both domestic and international, especially the African-American experience, while recognizing that racism exists in many countries worldwide. I have many people to thank for this series. Many people have made this possible. First and foremost, thank you, Mr. Glenn. I want our audience to know that I stand in awe of your courage, your resilience, and your faith. I hope today's event is not traumatizing, but rather healing for you. I'd like to thank Dr. Jackson and Dr. Bishop Morris, Chancellor Keon, and Provost Holford for funding this series, Sue Bremer, Catherine Olson, Dean Carey, and Rachel Pollock, PNW Office of Information Technology, my colleagues who helped plan this series, especially Dr. Arts, Sipes, Dr. Chaudhary, and Dr. Morrow. And of course, I thank all of you who are taking the time and the trouble to attend today. We have more than 300 people registered for today's event, and thank you so much for joining us today. You are cordially invited to attend the remaining events in fall 2020. On November 3rd, we have Dr. Lee Arts' presentation with Q&A, 12:30 to 1:45 p.m. titled Media Framing and the Politics of Racism. On November 30th, we have another Q&A by Dr. Kim Sipes, 2 p.m. to 3:15 p.m. titled How to Talk About Race in the 21st Century. Please bear with us if we have any kind of power outage or technical glitch. We are relying on Zoom technology. We hope nothing will happen. I would now like to introduce Dr. Karen Bishop Morris, who is an Associate Professor of English at PNW. She has served in a range of administrative roles, including Director of First Year Writing Program and the University Writing Center for a decade. She's a former chair of the Department of English and former interim dean of the Honors College. Her current academic work focuses on racial disparities and healthcare philanthropy. She's a frequent invited speaker and panelist on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and she has received awards for her work on diversity. So Dr. Bishop Morris is going to now take over.
Thank you so much, Professor Majumdar, for recognizing the Black lives lost through racialized police violence and also reminding us of the importance to reflect and, when possible, to say their names. I want to thank everyone in our listening and viewing audience. We know you have a number of ways to choose to spend your lunch hour, so that you decided to log on to yet another Zoom and spend it with us is really, really touching. The importance of this series on race, racism, and anti-racism cannot be overstated. It's important to know that this discussion series is faculty-driven and grew entirely out of the faculty's desire to shine a light on racial injustice and to create a space for open dialogue on the scourge of violence that dominates the news cycle. So today's discussion really impacts everyone, okay? Not just Black issues that we're talking about, not just issues affecting Black males, but you, your neighbors, your coworkers, your employees. You all have a responsibility for calling out racism when you see it and actively pursuing paths to right systemic wrongs to create a better and more inclusive society. I hope you will share the video of today's discussions with others in your personal and professional circles. We are truly gifted by our extraordinary special guest today, Mr. Roosevelt Glynn. His courage and strength is extraordinary, and his mindset is truly matchless. He doesn't know this, but I have renamed him Roosevelt Mandela Glynn. And here's the reason. When Dr. Jackson introduced us, I asked Mr. Glynn how he made the choice to advocate for others and be public about his experience rather than just, you know, going off and trying to have some privacy and a quiet life. And his response without hesitation was this: Karen, it was an easy choice for me. When I was imprisoned, I always prayed for others to hear my voice. Once I got out, I realized that I was now the voice I had been praying for. I wanted to be better than my captors. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the measure of the man who will grace us with his presence today. A few housekeeping announcements. So first of all, speaker view. If you are viewing this presentation in Zoom, please take a moment to click the icon in the upper right-hand corner and switch from gallery to speaker view. It will ensure the best possible experience for you, and it will also help the quality of our recording. On that note, let me repeat that we are recording, so if it is your preference not to have your name or countenance visible on screen, then we invite you to view the discussion on Facebook, where we are also live streaming the event. You would just simply search in the Facebook spacebar, PNW series, race, racism, and anti-racism. And naturally, post-event, this recording will be available in a number of different areas. We invite you to mark your calendars, as Professor Majumdar said, for the remaining events in the fall series. And lastly, it's important to note that the views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Purdue University Northwest, the Purdue Northwest faculty organizers, or others who may be associated with its production. Finally, attendees will post their questions in the chat, which is managed by yours truly. And I think that's our final note, which means we're ready to get into our discussion. So with that, I have the privilege of introducing our host, Professor Nikki Jackson. Dr. Jackson is the coordinator and associate professor of criminal justice at Purdue University Northwest. She earned her BA cum laude in criminal justice at Ball State University in 1985. She earned her MA in criminal justice at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and then her PhD in sociology with a specialization in deviance at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Dr. Jackson is the faculty advisor to the Criminal Justice Club and mentors scores of students throughout the program. Her research interests include domestic violence, school violence, juvenile delinquency, and of course today's subject, wrongful convictions. In 2007, Dr. Jackson edited the Encyclopedia of Domestic Violence and has written numerous chapters on domestic violence issues. She has also been a keynote speaker at various domestic violence seminars and vigils. She serves on numerous boards in the community, currently as on the board of directors at the Caring Place, as well as Duneland Chamber of Commerce, an advisory board member at the Indiana State Prison, and an advisory board member at the Westville Correctional Center. In addition, Dr. Jackson serves on many committees for nonprofit organizations throughout Porter County. Some more well-known events are Mardi Gras, as well as Hat a Girl. Dr. Jackson has been recognized for her community service with a variety of honors. In 2017, she was the recipient of the Volunteer of the Year Award for Housing Opportunities. In 2018, she was a recipient of the Spirit Award presented by the United Way of Porter County and the Times of Northwest Indiana. In 2019, she was recognized as a person making a difference in her community by NBC Chicago News. Dr. Jackson has played a major role in raising public awareness on the issue of wrongful conviction. She has hosted several forums with panel members, including exonerees and experts, to address causes, impacts, and reform issues. One of the many accomplishments that will be her legacy is her meeting with senators and state representatives to discuss the need for compensation in a bill and introduce a bill in Indiana. In May 2019, House Bill 1150 was passed, which provides financial compensation to exonerees. Dr. Jackson attended the governor's ceremonial signing of the bill. She has been conducting research on the prison experiences of innocent inmates and has a forthcoming book addressing victims of wrongful conviction. She has proudly been the voice for those who remain voiceless. And one extension of her work is also the creation of the Willie T. Donald Exoneration Advisory Coalition to assist Indiana exonerees in their reintegration efforts. Please join me in welcoming Professor Nikki Ali Jackson.
Thanks for having me, Karen.
Thanks for arranging this. So Dr. Jackson, I know it was important to you to set some context for this conversation. And so I think we maybe should start by just allowing you to do that. Because we have so many students in the audience, I think it might be important for them to hear from you how this fight for justice really became your journey, your life's work.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Morris. I did not expect that I was going to be this catalyst to make a change in this state of Indiana in terms of compensation for those who've been wrongfully convicted. I just happened to read a newspaper article about a gentleman, Mr. Willie T. Donald, he goes by Timmy, and I read a story about him being locked up for 24 years, and I couldn't believe it. And he was sitting in prison for 24 years for multiple crimes he never committed, and I wanted to meet him, and I was able to reach his attorney and set up a meeting with him near campus, and we met, and he shared with me his ordeal. And as I left that breakfast, I remember going to my car and just having a complete breakdown, just crying, like I made all these promises to this man. I'm going to get a bill created. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And I was like, how am I going to do all of this? Well, that night I sent an email to Barry Scheck, and he responded. He is the person who started the Innocence Project, and he replied to me the next morning, and has been they've been a very strong advocate for all the work that's been done in Indiana. And so with that, I decided that I needed to go out and tell people what's happening in the state of Indiana. And so my students hear about it constantly. And one of the things that I share with students is when I was a student sitting in the classes that they're sitting in, I never thought that I was going to be part of a big historical change in the state of Indiana. I mean, I would just sit in class, listen to my professors, take my notes, ask questions. And if somebody would have told me back in the 80s, early 80s, that I was going to be involved in this movement, I would have told you I would have probably, won the lottery before something like that happened. And that did not happen yet, but that's still not in the cards. So at any rate, this journey has been amazing. The exonerees I've met have been incredible and gracious. They've allowed me to enter their world. And Mr. Glenn is one of those exonerees, and I am so grateful for his friendship. And I'm looking forward to everybody hearing more today about what has happened with Mr. Glenn and with other exonerees. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jackson. So your conversation today, as you mentioned with Mr. Glenn, focuses on his experience with the criminal justice system and subsequently his experience as an exoneree. Despite the advancing pace of DNA exonerations, according to the National Registry of Exonerations, a total of 143 people across 34 states were exonerated in the US in 2019 alone. Combined, those exonerees served a total of 1,908 years in prison for crimes they did not commit. Help us understand, what are some of the contributing causes to wrongful conviction?
Well, the first thing I want everyone to understand is that there's not one factor which influences a wrongful conviction. There are multiple factors. As you'll hear in Mr. Glenn's case later, it wasn't just one thing. But according to the National Registry of Exoneration, there are 5 primary causes of a wrongful conviction. One is perjury, and that's also a false accusation. Let's say a jailhouse snitch, tells the prosecutor Roosevelt did this, and their incentive was to possibly get a lower sentence or, get out of jail or prison early. So that's one reason. So perjury, false accusation. Another factor is official misconduct. And according to the National Registry of Exoneration, police and prosecutorial misconduct accounted for 54% of the exonerations. We need some reform, and we'll talk more about that later. Mistaken witness identification is another factor which contributes to a wrongful conviction. We'll talk more about that later. False or misleading DNA. And what's interesting about DNA is DNA helped exonerate some of our exonerees, but it also, in some cases, led to their wrongful conviction. So we have to look at DNA as a positive, but it could also, in some situations, end up hurting some folks. And then the 5th contributing factor is false confession. And a lot of folks say, well, why would somebody falsely confess to a crime they didn't commit? Well, there's a lot of different reasons. I've spent the past summer talking to over 40 exonerees throughout the country, and several of them falsely confessed to crimes. They were exhausted during interrogation. Some, as some of you are familiar with in Chicago, there are Chicago torture survivors for Detective Burge, who had physically beaten confessions out of young Black boys. And these Mark Clements, Stanley Rice, these 2 gentlemen, one spent 31 years in prison for crimes he didn't commit. That was Stanley. And Mark Clements spent 28 years in prison for crimes he didn't commit. And they both were physically beaten. I mean, they were tortured into a confession. So false confessions do occur.
You shared a lot there, and I look forward to us digging into that a little deeper. One of the things that stood out to me was the statistic that is oft repeated, that 13% of the population is African American, but yet whenever we see headlines, it seems like overwhelmingly we are seeing Black males who are exonerated. To what degree do you think race plays a factor, or does it, in wrongful convictions?
Race does play a factor in wrongful convictions. As we know, and you just noted, Dr. Morris, 13% of the U.S. population is African American. Based on I just received a report from the director of the National Registry of Exoneration. She submitted it to me, I think the day it went out or the next day. It came out September 1st, 2020. So this is a very new report. And it showed us that 49% of the exonerations were of those who were African American. So while 13% of the U.S. population is African American, 49% of the exonerees were African American. So they are way overrepresented in exonerations. And one of the things that's important to know with wrongful convictions in race is that many of these exonerees were convicted of murder and of drug offenses. And so those types of offenses get very lengthy sentences. They're very serious sentences. And one of the things, and I know Dr. Morris, you and I talked about this before, but this is important for others to understand. The reality is that today, 1 in every 3 Black male babies born will be incarcerated at some point in his lifetime, compared to 1 in 23 white males. So it's a startling number. I mean, we've got way too many. And people ask me, my students ask me, everybody I've talked to about this issue says, well, how does this happen? Well, there are racial biases at every stage of the criminal justice process. First of all, Blacks are more likely to be arrested. They're just more likely to be arrested, even for similar crimes, especially if we go to drugs. There are no racial variations in terms of drugs, drug usage, drug selling, but African Americans are disproportionately arrested. African Americans are more likely to go to trial. African Americans are more likely to be convicted. They're more likely to be sentenced, and their sentences are much more serious than those of their white counterparts. So yes, race does play a factor. And when we talk to Mr. Glenn in a few minutes, you'll all hear about mistaken witness identity. African-American males are much more likely to be mistakenly or wrongfully, I call it wrongfully identified, particularly in rape cases by white women. And we'll hear more about that today with Mr. Glenn.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jackson, for setting the stage. If you're just logging on or tuning in, you are listening to the PNW series on race, racism, and anti-racism. Our host today is Dr. Nikki Ali Jackson, who is coordinator and associate professor of criminal justice at Purdue University Northwest. And our featured guest is Mr. Roosevelt Glynn. I am going to tee up a video. Mr. Glynn's case was featured on an episode of 48 Hours. And so if you will just permit us to share a brief clip from that 48 Hours television segment, the next voice you hear will be Dr. Jackson's introducing Mr. Roosevelt Glynn.
The victim gets out of her car and she's assaulted and she says raped by 5 men.
2 men are convicted. Was race the reason?
I didn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I had suicide all over.
2 families knew they were innocent.
When the judge said 75 years, and I attempted to take my life.
I feel like I've lost the most important time of my life, where a son bonds with his father and becomes a man.
I dreamt of a professor and law students coming to my rescue. I used to see it on TV all the time.
He got his wish, a 25-year battle. The answer is always in the DNA.
When it's not you in the DNA, it's not you. And everybody knew it before trial.
Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to introduce you all to Mr. Roosevelt Glynn. Roosevelt, you're going to have to unmute yourself, I think. You ready? Are you unmuted? There we go. I am very fortunate to call this man my friend. We have worked together in terms of fighting injustice in the state of Indiana. Roosevelt, we're just gonna, I don't even have any questions written down, and for those who know me know I talk too much, so cut me off at any time. But can you take us back to January 2nd, 1990? What happened that day?
Well, January 2nd, 1990, I was at work. And I worked at the steel mill. And one day, my foreman, he came up to the north end of the plant, and he told me that there was going to be a safety meeting and that everybody needed to attend the safety meeting. So I got in my payloader and drove down to the south end of the plant. And when I got there, everybody was sitting around talking, wow, we're having a meeting late at night. You know, that was unusual. And then the plant manager was also present. Like, that was really unusual. But he began to discuss different occurrences and the way things were going to go for this new year. And there was a knock on the door. And when the knock on the door happened, everyone, of course, it got their attention. And there were several men and women that came through the door, neatly dressed, nicely dressed. So I thought in my mind, these were representatives of the company, because weeks prior, I had helped the guy pull his arm out of a conveyor where he had got jammed in a conveyor, and our company was big on safety. So I'm thinking these are representatives of the company come to present me with some type of award. And this is what's going through my mind. And I'm sitting there like, wow, man, they're going all out, present me with some type of safety award. So as they came in, they began naming names. So they said Roosevelt Glenn, and I immediately got up and said, hey, that's me. And immediately they drew guns and said, get on the ground. And I thought it was a joke. And it wasn't a joke, because I spent the next 17 years in prison.
So Roosevelt, tell us what happened when you got to the police station. What did the police tell you? Why were you there?
In the beginning, they wouldn't say. They just told me to, well, first, on my way to the prison, that's when I realized this wasn't a joke. Is when I came outside and squad cars was everywhere. And so I said, this is not a joke. So when I got in the police car and on our way to the county jail, to the city jail, I asked them several times, what am I being arrested for? What is going on? And I was told to shut up with the N-word. So after I heard that, I got a little scared, because I'm like, okay, well, what's really, because I'm really dumbfounded of the whole situation. So I was quiet until we got to that police station. And there, I was told in interrogation that they had a confession for me to sign, because I was facing 120 years for raping, being a part of a brutal rape to a white woman. And I told them, rape? Are you crazy? And I had a few choice words that I won't repeat right now. And we began to go back and forth, and I got pushed, and we began to go back and forth again. And I told them I wasn't signing no confessions. I haven't committed any crimes. So they took me back to a holding cell, what they call a holding cell, and left me in there for hours. Now, I meant to tell you all, they arrested 5 of them, because it was supposed to have been 5 black men brutally raped a white woman. So I'm taking it that all this time I sat in this holding cell, that they were interrogating each one of us. So when they brought me back, I'm thinking, okay, they found out that I'm the wrong guy. That's what they had to find out. So, but instead they take me into this little room, and they slam a pair of green coveralls down on the desk and say, aren't these yours? I say, are they mine? I said, I don't know. You arrested me, I had on a pair. I had reported a pair stolen a month prior to this arrest. I said, so I don't know which pair is it. And they told me, no, these are yours. You left them at the scene of a crime. They fit your size, and we got you. You know, your run is over, because this was a crime that was happening throughout Lake County, where they had named it Bump and Rob. And they said it was reported that 5 black men were running around committing these crimes, robberies, and then all of a sudden became a rape. And so they told me I was a part of that. I was one of the leaders. And if I didn't sign the confession, I will probably do an extensive amount of time in prison. And I told them to do what they had to do, because I wasn't going to sign any confessions to raping a woman. I've never been in trouble. There's no way. You know, I'll fight it. So that was the end of that story. And as we all know, I was convicted and sent to prison for 36 years.
Well, Mr. Glenn, let's go back for a few minutes. Let's just go back a little bit to, you were convicted. The prosecutor, and I know there's some prosecutors on the Zoom today, and I'd like for them to hear a little bit more about what did happen. And I think some of them may not have been at the Lake County Prosecutor's Office at the time. Why do you think the prosecutors, because we just heard the clip, there's DNA out there, why do you think the prosecutors, in your mind, why do you think the prosecutors did not look at that DNA, which didn't match you? It did not match you at all, right? So why did it not end there? Why did it continue and you went to trial? You actually had 2 trials. So why do you think it went to trial if the DNA was there?
Okay, in the very beginning, when we, all 5 of us volunteered to give DNA, hair samples, and everything like that. And so we thought after that we was gonna go home, but instead we was taken to the county jail. And we had to sit there 4 months. And during that time we sat there 4 months, the DNA test was sent off to laboratories. And when we came to court that 4th month, the judge brought us back to court and he released us because DNA didn't link us to the crime. So at that time, we thought it was over. We went back to work, went on with our lives, and then it was a few months later, I got a phone call saying, I'm being tried for this case. And I said, tried? The DNA didn't link us to the crime. Why would I possibly be tried? Well, they had gathered some jailhouse snitches that said I confessed it in while I was in the county jail. And now they had a head hair from Indiana Laboratory that matched the characteristics of my head hair, as well as these green commodities. So when my lawyer began to tell me these things, I was like, oh man, I was so scared. I was gonna run. Okay, at first I thought, get out of here, because I know black men don't have good statistics in the courtroom. But I talked to an uncle of mine. He told me, no, don't run. Stay there and fight it. If you didn't do it, fight it. So I stayed. And one of my co-defendants, he went to trial first, because now they also now have identified him as one of the first men that approached the victim's car. Whereas the victim initially said she could not identify any of her attackers because of those green coveralls they had put over her face, and she couldn't see them. And she didn't even want to participate in the lineup. But what happened was, what we found out is the detective in the case and the investigators, they took our pictures to the lady's house and told her that we were the guys. And long story short, he went to trial first. They used my head hair that they said, the laboratory said matches my characteristics, 26 of my characteristics. And they used the green coveralls against him, and he was convicted. So after he was convicted, I believe he was sentenced to like 65 years. And so when that happened, I was really ready to run and leave because I was next. And, but I kept hearing my uncle in my back of my mind telling me, fight it. If you didn't do it, fight it. So I went to trial, I fought it, and I got a hung jury. And so after the hung jury, that attorney I had, he moved on with his life. And then I had a second attorney for my second trial. And in this trial, I was convicted of rape. And I was sentenced to 36 years. And I had to do 18 of them.
So you did your full sentence. You were required to do 18 years, right? You had a good time. So you did your entire prison sentence. And then what happened when you had not been exonerated at this point? What happened when you were released from prison? What happened with your life?
Okay, I would like to just share with everybody first, because I know I don't look like, I don't feel like, nor do I act like what I've been through. But I've been through hell, okay? And I've stared death in the eyes. I've had suicide on my back, low self-esteem, hopelessness. I just want to give up. But I put my faith in God, and I believe that's when I received the power to endure the 18 years, and I was released on parole, and I was forced to register as a sexual violent predator. I was forced to attend therapeutic classes for rapists, child molesters, and incest. And this is when they found out I was the wrong person after I've done all this. And at that time, I realized that I lost my whole career. I lost 401ks, retirement, pension, whatever, I lost everything. And now at the age of 59, what do I do?
So how did you become exonerated?
Well, this is a real long story.
All right, well,
But
let's get, because
right.
So maybe I'm just going to jump in and remind folks that if you have a question for Mr. Glynn or for Professor Jackson, please feel free to post your question in the chat and we'll get to those as soon as possible. And I'd also like to just slip in a really brief plug. He has written a book about his experience, and the book is called Innocent Nightmare, and it is available on Amazon.
Thank you. So I don't recall. Roosevelt, would you show everybody your shirt? Can you show everybody your shirt? He's got his Innocent Nightmare shirt. This is from his book. And I am fortunate, I have a copy of the book, and Mr. Glenn actually autographed it for me, so I'm really excited, and I keep that, actually, you probably don't even know this, but it's right next to me, so I have it all the time when I'm at home. And at any rate, so Fran Watson played a pivotal role in your exoneration. Fran Watson is a law professor at IU, McKinney School of Law. She's also the director of the Center for, is it called the Wrongful Conviction Center? I believe that's what it's called.
Yes, it is.
And so can you tell me how Professor Watson got involved with your case and how you did become exonerated?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, Professor Watson, when I met her, it was like that dream I used to have about meeting a professor and law students and everything like that. My sister, she was like my voice on the outside, and she pounded the pavement, she flew places, because she knew her brother was no rapist. And so she met Professor Watson, and Professor Watson told her she would read the transcripts, and Professor Watson read the transcripts after meeting my sister. And Professor Watson, she called my sister and told her she couldn't believe what she had read and that she would like to meet me. And we met in prison. When I was in prison, I met her, and we lost we lost at least about 4 or 5 appeals. So Professor Watson, she's an angel because she never gave up. And I would tell her time after time, sometimes her and the students would come and visit me, and I would tell them we would lose an appeal, and I would be the one encouraging them, hey, let's keep fighting. We don't want to give up now, right? I had something to lose. But anyway, I ended up doing all my time, and we still kept in contact, and she was still fighting the case. And one day she called me, it was several years later, I had been out, and she called me and she said, well, Glenn, I know you moved on with your life and putting everything behind you, but I believe we have the technology we need to end this nightmare of yours. And I told her, I said, what's going on? She said, do you want to be bothered with this? I said, of course I want to be bothered with this. But she told me she had met a scientist, he's out of Pittsburgh. And he has a laboratory called Cybernetics. He was also responsible for 9/11, doing DNA testing through the 9/11. And he also done it for the military. So when Professor Watson told me about this, I was like, wow, let's do it. So Indiana gave her permission to have him run it through his system, because Indiana had used him, I think twice prior before, which convicted people. And so we were the first ones they was using on the defense side to exonerate. So this gentleman, he received everything from Indiana, and he ran it through his lab, and he was able to find all 5 DNAs of the perpetrators. And when he found all 5 of the DNAs, excuse me a minute.
It's okay. All right. So let's go back a little bit. You and I have talked for years about your experience, and my family prays for you. We think about you daily, and you know that in the other exonerees that we've become really good friends with. One of the questions I asked you, I'm just going to back up a little. While you were in prison, How did you cope with that? How did you handle being incarcerated knowing that you're an innocent person? How did you go through a day, every day, for almost, for 17 years, knowing that you were innocent?
Well, I had decided, and I made a conscious decision that I wasn't going to let this destroy me, because I think my mom done an excellent job in raising me. And so while in prison, I decided that I was going to try to be a better man than I was even before I came to prison. That became my goal. How can I improve myself, even though I thought I was a good man before prison? Because I learned in prison that the best way to deal with it is to look at what you can do for yourself, how you can mentally beat this battle, because the battlefield is in the mind, and this is a mind destroyer. That's what prison is designed to destroy your mind. And I decided that I was going to be a better person than the people who I felt had wronged me. I was going to be a better man, a better father, a better brother. I just wanted to work on me, and I started focusing on myself. I started taking courses in prison that was self-help. And those courses, I took it there, reminded me that I was worth fighting for my mind. And my family seeing me every 2 weeks for those years in prison was a reminder where I come from and the type of person I was raised to be.
So, Roosevelt, you and I spoke the other day, I think we spoke on Sunday, and you shared a case with me that you wanted to share with the guests today. You told me that while you were incarcerated, you remember hearing on the news about the Duke lacrosse players, the 3 young male students who had been accused of raping a Black woman, right? And do you want to share with them what you shared with me about the parallels of your cases and how you were treated differently?
Oh yeah, that's when I realized that there really were 2 systems, one for white and one for Black. Because when I heard about their case, I think it was around 2006. It was somewhere around 2006, I believe, when I heard about their case, and I seen how these men were accused of raping a white woman, and
a Black woman.
I'm sorry, they was accused. The white men were accused of raping a Black woman, and in their case, they had DNA testing, and they also had photo arrays, which was proven. The photo arrays were proven to be improperly used by the investigators, and the DNA didn't link them to the crime. And in that case, they were dismissed right off the top. They were dismissed, didn't have to go to trial and none of that, dismissed, and was paid, for the embarrassment. And in my case, the same thing. DNA didn't link me to the crime. Photo array was improper. I was tried and convicted, and it took 25 years to be free. And it's ridiculous.
So when you say they were paid, just so we're all clear, Duke University paid those lacrosse players, I believe, $60 million total. So each of the 3 lacrosse players were paid out $20 million, from my understanding. And to date, Mr. Glenn, what has the state of Indiana given you in terms of money?
I haven't received a dime.
Have you received an apology? Have you received anything from the state of Indiana?
I would say the prosecutor that signed the papers that cleared my name and exonerated me, he signed the final papers that needed to be signed, and he apologized.
Okay. What did he say to you? Or
he said it. He told me that he believed this should have never happened. I said, should have? You believe? I said, I know it should have never happened. And that was on the day that my co-defendant was being released from prison.
Because he was still in.
Yeah, he was still in prison when I got out. Because he was sentenced to 65 years, and I was sentenced to 36. And I completed my sentence, and he was still in prison. and Professor Watson, who was still working for us both, they got him cleared and me cleared and freed, and he had to be released from prison.
So
Professor Jackson, if I might just jump in for a second, because I think it's so important for Mr. Glenn to know just how much love and positivity is happening for you in the chat right now. I mean, very literally, people are saying, you know, they love your positivity. You're so inspiring. But there's also another special guest in the audience who is the namesake for the Willie T. Donald Exoneree Advisory Coalition that was started by Professor Jackson and is housed in our College of Humanities, Education, and Social Sciences. So a special message to you, Mr. Glenn, from Timmy, who just says much love and thank you so much for being his partner in this important work.
So thanks a lot.
So a question along these lines comes from one of our esteemed audience members who says, Mr. Glenn, what changes do you think, now that you are at this stage, need to be made to the system, from arrests to trials to overturning wrongful convictions? What kind of support and structural changes would you like to see occur?
I believe what would help the system a great deal. There's no one cure, but one thing that could really help the system is accountability. If police are held accountable for their actions, background checks being available to the public with police officers, because in my case, the police officer in my case, he had bad history. And his history was, prior to me, another black man was convicted, and he sued the city of Hammond, and he won millions of dollars from this same detective. And I believe if all this would come to light before there's any type of trial, or you have this as a tool, I think the courts would stop the trial. Not only accountability, really the systemic that goes through the court system. You have to excuse me because it rips at me every time I talk about this, but the systemic racism that goes on through the court system, like I told you, I lost 5 appeals. And in one of those appeals I lost, I believe it was only because I was a black man. And this was at the time when they found out that mitochondrial DNA testing had been done on my hair. And they found out it wasn't my hair, so false evidence was used against me at my trial. And they said that wasn't good enough because of this bogus identity of my co-defendant and because of the jailhouse snitches said I confessed. So it's a lot of different ways if we can put mechanisms in place to oversee our courts, because the judge has a power when they see stuff coming before the court that's really bogus. And I know they're all intelligent, you know, and they can see through this stuff. And it's really a shame how they use things like harmless error. One of my appeals, it was a harmless error, even though they now know false evidence was used against me. That's harmless. I mean, how is that harmless? And then one court said it was the second appeal. They said it was procedure default because a prior attorney didn't object during my trials back in the 90s. You know, it's just go on and on and on, and there's no way of checking the system and what they're doing.
I'm going to add something to that piece because I think it's really important. I think Mr. Glenn is absolutely correct in terms of accountability. I think police need to have some accountability, but I also believe prosecutors and public defenders need to be accountable. I want folks to understand that in many of the interviews I've done with exonerees, prosecutors had evidence which was available to them, they had, and they did not provide it to the defense, which would show that these individuals are innocent. So prosecutors have to have some accountability, and I think they want to. I think most prosecutors are there to serve justice. But at times there is some false information out there. They're using jailhouse snitches who else will you use? I mean, these are the people that are sitting in jail with these suspects. But at the end of the day, we do see cases where police are being sued, but we really don't hear about prosecutors. And I think that's one of my goals, is that we create a conviction integrity unit at these prosecutors' offices. I'm working with 2 prosecutors, Lake County prosecutor, Bernard Carter, and a Porter County prosecutor, Gary, I always say his name wrong, but I think it's German. So I'm working with both of them to try to establish a conviction integrity unit. So these cases like Mr. Glenn and Mr. Donald, we're not going to see these folks languishing in prison for Mr. Donald was 24 years. I mean, we're talking decades. So, and there's no accountability. There's not an oops, there's not an I'm sorry. And some things need to change, and we have to work on reform. And going back to police, I think Mr. Glenwood and Mr. Donald would both tell you photo lineups, physical lineups have to be modified. They have to be changed. They have to go by what the victim, what the witness, their descriptions are. We should have consistent suspects in the lineup. There shouldn't be one who stands out. And I think that's what we've been seeing, is that one person is standing out, and police officers are pointing to that one individual.
I'm also trying to put forth what I call the Glenn Law. And the Glenn Law, which I haven't, got too far with it yet, but the Glenn Law is simply no new law. It's just strengthening the laws we already have. It's shutting down those loopholes from loopholes like the harmless error, procedure default, and so on and so forth. These are the loopholes that are causing men to sit in prison years longer when I could have been out in 2001, if they would have not used a procedure default. So the Glenn Law, I believe it will be important to help the system move along and get people out of prison, because there is a statute on the books all over every state that false evidence used against you is automatic reversal and a new trial. And I believe that's called a Brady violation. But they're finding ways to go around that with these harmless errors and procedure defaults in timely fashion. So we need to upgrade the books, not change the Constitution or change the laws, but just upgrade, because our forefathers, they already laid the foundation. Back in the day, I think the 1800s, Blackman, he made a statement like it's better that 10 guilty go free than one innocent suffer. And George Washington came along and says better that 100 guilty go free than one innocent suffer. So they was trying to set the stage then that it was important not to convict and harm innocent people, no matter who you are.
And I think one last piece that I want to throw in, just to respond to that question to Mr. Glenn, is the public defender or the defense counsel for defendants. The Sixth Amendment provides us with the right to counsel, but nowhere in the Sixth Amendment does it say that that counsel has to be competent, and that's a real problem. In my interviews with exonerees, I have learned that some exonerees never even met with their attorney or saw them, never even laid eyes on them until they went to trial. That's unimaginable, and that's outrageous and egregious. And so we really need to make sure that if we have public defenders, that they are competent and they are investigating for their client and representing their client properly.
You say students are is here also?
Yep. Yes.
And that's the future. And we really need to keep having forums like this for our students who are going to be in charge of the future. They need to know that this stuff happens and it's real. This is not just something made up by a black man. This is really happening to my people and to myself. And the students are the future. And I believe that's what's going to make the change. the future.
The beauty of that, Mr. Glenn, is that our students are involved, and you've met many of my students. They've attended many events, and you've had they've had the privilege and honor of meeting you, and you've had the privilege and honor of meeting them. With the Willie T. Donald Exoneration Coalition, we are partnering with Notre Dame School of Law, and I am working with the director, law professor Jimmy Goulet, and we are reviewing. I just got a case. I sent it over to him to review and said, hey, is this man, sitting in prison? Is he innocent? Is he not? So what's happening is that these forums are wonderful. This conversation is wonderful, and education is really important. But at the end of the day, we have to have action. We have to have action plan. And I think that's what this coalition is doing. Purdue Northwest has really, it's really now well known in the Innocence Network. We've put ourselves on the map saying, listen, there are people in Indiana who have been wrongfully convicted, and we do care. And Mr. Glenn, I care. And my colleagues care, my students care, the administrators care. And we want to do what's right for you, Mr. Donald, and every other exoneree in the state of Indiana. And that's another piece. We're only talking about those who've been exonerated. The National Registry of Exoneration tells us there are 2,666 exonerees, but I want you to keep in mind, those are the people who are known to be wrongfully convicted. As we sit here today, it's estimated or guesstimated between 25 to 50% of those sitting in our prisons are innocent, but they're not exonerated. So the definition of wrongful conviction is really unclear. It's vague. We're just talking about exonerees at this point, but there are others who are sitting in prison who have been wrongfully convicted. So let's not forget about those folks.
That is such a startling statistic, and I just want to again share some of the love and admiration and respect. Mr. Glenn in the chat, keep working on the Glenn Law from at least half of the participants and attendees in the chat. Another comment. I wish this was conducted in person. It would be a privilege to shake your hand and give you a hug. Many students are just really inspired, I think, and inspired to action by your story. And so I want to just make sure we have an opportunity to get a few of their questions in before the conversation goes in another direction. So this question was really asked in a few different ways, but the basic question is, what advice would you give a Black man so they don't go through what you went through? Or to say another way, what can be done to protect the Black man in America?
Well, that's a very good but hard question, because I thought I was an example of a good Black man staying out of trouble. I was the Black man that went to school, graduated from high school, took up a trade, worked all my life, obeyed the laws of the land, paid my taxes, respected everybody, and I still went to prison. So the only thing I could advise is the good core values that you were born with and that's inside you. Follow those and continue to just be the good person that you are. And when times like this happen, you'll be able to handle it should it ever happen, because there's no one solution, as we found out. No matter who you are, where you are, there's no solution that could solve this problem that's happening today. It's just a matter of who, what, when, or where. So I would just encourage you to continue to be a good person.
So another question from a student: what was the first thing you did when you got out of prison?
Ate. Ate a lot of food, because when I got out, the Professor Fran Watson, the law students that you seen on that clip, we all met in Indianapolis, because I was released from a prison in Indianapolis. And we all met and we ate, and they fed me too. I didn't know what to do. Ugh.
That's great. So, Mr. Glenn, you have many, many, many friends in the audience, but I would be remiss not to acknowledge this one, and it is the Dean of our College of Humanities, Education, and Social Sciences, Dr. Elaine Carey, and she wants to extend her greetings to you. She's actually, of course, had the pleasure of meeting with you, meeting your family, meeting Fran, your attorney, and so basically her question is this: the struggle of the wrongfully convicted has obviously had a huge impact on one's family and their resources. Could you talk about how HB 1150, if enacted properly, could help you and your family specifically?
Oh yeah, that's, for one, it'll make me not be a burden financially to anybody. Because when you leave prison, you just basically walk out with the clothes on your back. And this new bill that Indiana has introduced, well, thanks be to Ms. Jackson, Dr. Jackson, who has worked so hard with all of the exonerees and has now put Purdue on the map. I really appreciate her and all her efforts. And I want her to know that publicly. So she, you know how they say, give the roses while they're above ground. I just want to really thank you for all you've done. And working with you has been nothing but a pleasure, and I know other exonerees feel the same way. And we thank you, thank you, thank you, and we thank Purdue for allowing this to go forward.
Thank you, Roosevelt. I'm going to cry. I'm glad this is virtual because you'd all see me break down right now.
And what was the question?
How will this bill help exonerees such as yourself once you receive the funding?
Oh, but that was really the best answer. Is it makes you not be a burden to your family, because I was blessed to have a family that picked me up, housed me, and everything like that. But a lot of exonerees that get out, they don't have that luxury, or have that support. And having finances is the best thing that could happen to an exoneree, period. Because you have no medical, you have no dental, you have no clothes, you don't know where your next meal coming from, so it is hard. And before you leave prison, they even let you know. The statistics say that you'll be back within the next 6 months, within the next year. They give you a time schedule when you'll be back. But when they gave me the time schedule, I said, nah, I won't be back. But that's what's helpful to exonerees. That money would be, I'm talking about, if they ever let go of it, it would be a big help.
So we have about 12 minutes remaining. So I just want to encourage folks, if you want to begin posting some of your last questions in the chat, if you happen to just be logging on, this is a conversation between Professor Nikki Ali Jackson, who is the coordinator and associate professor of criminal justice at Purdue University Northwest, and Mr. Roosevelt Glenn, who is an exoneree and the author of Innocent Nightmare. And Innocent Nightmare is available for purchase on Amazon. And here is the cover of the book, and we encourage you to support Mr. Glenn and his continued work.
Thank you.
Dr. Morris, do you want to say that?
So I can ask some more questions.
I've actually covered, I wanted to go over the action plan with everyone, but I actually did most of that during our conversation.
Absolutely. So here is a question. I think this is interesting, food for thought. So just as we believe systemic racial bias significantly contributes to the disproportionate number of arrests and charges and guilty verdicts, do you also believe that there is a systemic problem in the African American community and culture that leads to these disproportionate numbers?
Is that for me?
Is that for Roosevelt?
It's for either of you, either or both of you.
Roosevelt, why don't you start? Why don't you talk about, you and I have had this conversation about systemic racism. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah. As far as I don't think a neighborhood would be the purpose of being used by the law. I mean, as far as police brutality in minority neighborhoods is not because of the neighborhood. wrongful convictions happening in Black communities is not because of the neighborhood. I believe it's a mental situation that has to be eradicated. It's a mental, systemic mental problem where Black people, minority people are not looked upon equally as to the white race. And when we could weed out that mentality that's going on in our system, then I think all of that would change.
Great. So folks are inquiring, they're interested in the book on Amazon, and they're wondering if there are alternative outlets to purchase the book, or is Amazon the only way? I think the sort of root of the question is, are the proceeds actually supporting you and your continued work, for instance, with the Glenn's Law, or are they supporting Amazon?
That's a good question.
Oh, it's a mixture. I get a portion and Amazon get a portion.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Mr.
And there
Glenn,
are, excuse me, it could be downloaded too on your electronic device.
thank you for that. So it is available in multiple formats. And
Correct.
just as a reminder, the title is Innocent Nightmare by Roosevelt Glenn. So this question has come up a couple of times. Is there anything you would have done differently when in police custody, like remaining silent or requesting an attorney earlier, when you think back on those initial moments?
Oh, yes. The problem is when you're innocent and never committed a crime in your life, you tend to not worry about anything. You know, you feel confident that the system is going to work. And so you don't think of calling a lawyer, doing this and that. But if I could go turn back the hands of time, I would definitely have asked to speak to an attorney first, because I was told by an attorney, once I got an attorney, that I gave up too much information that ended up hurting me, because when they tell you what you say could be used against you, they really mean that. You know, it's not a joke. They're going to use everything you say against you. So I would definitely get an attorney before I spoke.
So can I have a question. One of the areas of my questionnaire when I was interviewing exonerees was, in prison, a lot of people say I'm innocent, right? How do you know if somebody is innocent? How do you know if an inmate is truly innocent or not?
Well, I can only use myself as an example, because when I was in there, I didn't harp on it. I accepted the fact that I was in prison and I had to do whatever I can to fight to get my way out. And while you're in that environment, you can't harp on your innocence in a way that the other convicts begin to look down on you because you think you're better than them. So you really don't go to prison broadcasting about your case. That's a personal issue. So, but fortunately in my situation, a lot of the convicts there, they deemed me innocent because of the articles. You know, I was all over the paper and stuff like that. So that was a big help for me in my situation. But being able to identify somebody innocent would be hard, because nobody, I can't say nobody, but everybody puts on a mask when they get behind those walls, because you have to put on a mask to protect yourself.
Interestingly, some of the exonerees shared with me that they knew in their heart that somebody was innocent because they kept on fighting day after day.
Oh yeah, now that
month after month, year after year, they didn't stop. They didn't stop the fight. That's how they knew this person probably was innocent. They just never gave up. Can I ask one more question, Dr. Morris?
Sure.
I'd like to ask Mr. Glenn, because I think this is a question a lot of folks will have. I've asked your partner, Laureen, about this. How did this affect, you have children. You had children before you went to prison.
Yes.
You're a convicted sex offender, so when you get out of prison, you can't go to schools, you can't do things with your children. How did this affect your children?
Oh, that's the worst part. Leaving them, I left them. They were children, 2, 7, 8. And when I got out of prison, my daughters were in their 20s. They were grown, and my son, I think he was like 17, 18. But they were grown, and they lived their whole life without a father. So it affected them in a sense while they were young. My daughter had problems in school with her daddy being called a rapist, and she got angry. And so did my son. He began to fight. And my daughter, she began to start failing in her school. But her mom was able to get her on the right path, getting her help. She had to get her help and stuff like that because I was really connected.
And that's what really important that people understand. This didn't just affect you, it affected your family, your friends. There are so many victims of one wrongful conviction. The crime victim was also impacted. You know, she thought they had the right guys behind bars, and decades later, 17, 25 years later, they find out, oh, we've got the wrong people. So the true perpetrators were still out on the street. And that's one thing that people fail to remember. Just clearing a crime is one thing, but you've got the true perpetrators still out on the streets, possibly wreaking havoc. And so that's something that's really important for folks to understand. We must incarcerate the right person. We must.
So there are just a couple of final questions in the chat, and I want to make sure that these voices are heard. One is from someone you know. Your sister is here, Mr. Glenn, as well as your better half. You have a growing fan club, some purchases on Amazon, but also Professor Deepa Majumdar. Just again wanted to express on behalf of Purdue University Northwest just how wonderful and generous and what a loving spirit. This has been echoed by so many, countless, I can't count them all in the chat, for you to appear today and to share your story. But Professor Majumdar in particular says the humiliation, the pain, the injustice of it all, how you bore this without taking the lower road of anger and hatred is really inspiring. How has this entire ordeal changed you?
Well, when I went to prison, I wasn't a man of faith. And prison didn't destroy me, but it made me a man of faith. And I hold on to that faith and that belief that there's a higher power. And I believe that's what gave me my peace. Because you have to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. And I believe that God was my way. And I've held on to him ever since. And that study gives me my peace. So for somebody, it may be something else. But for me, it was holding on to my faith in God.
Thank you. Just 2 minutes remaining, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Second to the last question. Were the true perpetrators ever convicted?
To this day, no one has even searched for them, as far as to my knowledge. They have the DNA here in the state somewhere. My attorneys tell me they have the DNA, but no one has moved on it. So the victim still hasn't gotten her justice.
I really don't have words. And perhaps this last question and the answer to this is a good way to deal with that. And that is, Professor Jackson, Mr. Glenn, Mr. Donald, what do you believe can be done to overturn wrongful convictions? What are the next steps? What is the work?
Well, the work is definitely reform. We've already talked about police, must engage in best practices, prosecutors, public defenders, judges. There has to be an overhaul in the entire system. We know it's a problem. We recognize it's a problem. And now we have to go in and we have to make some changes. And one of the things that I think we're doing is really raising awareness that this is happening. And that's one of the reasons I created this coalition at the university. I want people to understand that this is happening in our own backyards. This is happening in our state. I mean, Mr. Glenn was arrested in Hammond, Indiana. That is where you know, Purdue Northwest, our Hammond campus is located. This is right here. This could be anyone. And I think having this exoneration coalition is a step in the right direction. I'm answering questions on a daily from people all over the country, asking questions on how this coalition can help. And we're brand new. We're going to be working really hard. And Mr. Glenn just brought up he'd like to have Glenn's Law, and I just heard that today. So that's something that my board and I will be having a conversation about. We're going to move forward. So again, we just have to listen to what these folks have gone through. And we didn't even get, there's so much more to this. Mr. Glenn, Mr. Donald, you know, they have suffered so much injury. And one of the things that I tell them, I'm preaching this everywhere I go. My husband's probably tired of me talking about this all the time because I talk about it 24/7. We have to right this wrong. We have to. My students will tell me they're going to law school, and initially they wanted to be prosecutors, and now they want to be public defenders or criminal defense attorneys, and that's really powerful. So people do want to make change. They do want to make change. And prosecutors, they want to do the right thing. They do want to do the right thing. We have to give them the tools to do the right thing. I don't know if Mr. Donald can even speak, or Mr. Glenn, you want to share in closing? And first, the other thing I want to say is Mr. Glenn took off today to be here with us. He took off work, and Mr. Donald worked a night shift, and I'm sure got home about 8:30 in the morning or 9 and is here with us. That is very telling about these folks, that they really, really want you to understand their ordeals. Roosevelt, I don't know if Timmy can say anything, but is there anything you want to share in closing?
Well, I just basically, you covered it all, because that's what we have to do. You know, the Glenn's Law, stop these appeals that's being shot down in the courtroom. Because when my appeal was shot down, it was like 20, 30 guys waiting to just see what happened on my appeal because they had similar issues. And I know this is not just in Indiana, it's all across the country. This is ridiculous how they're just shooting down appeals for no reason other than a timely fashion. Come on, people being left in prison.
Well, we're making some noise in Indiana. So
right.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Glenn. I just want you to know the extraordinary love that is filling the chat. Thank you so much, Professor Nikki Ali Jackson, for the incredible and impactful work that you are doing at Purdue University Northwest through your teaching, through the Willie T. Donald Exoneree Advisory Coalition, through the partnerships with Notre Dame. We know that there's so much more to see. We're looking forward to Glenn's Law. The title of the book is Innocent Nightmare, and it is available for purchase on Amazon. And the author is our esteemed guest today, Roosevelt Glenn. Thank you so much. I'd just like to do a very quick plug for our next session in the series, Tuesday, November 3rd, same time, 12:30, same Zoom room. Dr. Lee Artz, who is a professor of media studies at PNW, will be talking to us about media framing and the politics of racism. Thank you again so much, everyone, for attending, for the kind and warm sentiments. Mr. Glenn, Laureen, for your wonderful support. We thank you all. There she is. We thank you all for joining us. Please have a wonderful rest of your week.
Tell my sister I said thanks.
Mr. Renetta, he says thanks.
That's Renetta.
Renetta, bye all.
Right.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.